The new E, the new attitude, brought to you by Mercedes-Benz. Maybank says second quarter FY21 net profit more than doubled as loans continued to grow, net interest margin expanded with a more cost-effective funding mix, and impairment came in lower than a year ago. Quarterly earnings stood at 1.96 billion ringgit, though revenue fell marginally by 3.9% to 11.34 billion ringgit. The lender declared a first interim dividend of 28 cents per share to its shareholders. Meanwhile, for the first half of FY21, cumulative net profit grew by 45.6% to 4.35 billion ringgit, despite revenue falling by 5.9% to 23.55 billion ringgit. During the period, the group saw net fee-based income ease by 16.5% to 3.5 billion ringgit, due primarily to lower investment disposal gains and mark-to-market losses. This was offset by the increase in net fund-based income, which came in 16.1% higher at 9.5 billion ringgit. Maybank Chairman Tan Sri Zamzam Zairani Muhammad Isa said in a statement that the group remains cautious about the overall regional growth momentum given the sudden resurgence in COVID-19 cases. He warned that the protracted lockdowns in many regional markets will have some impact on the group's growth prospects in the coming quarters. Meanwhile, Group President and CEO Dato' Abdul Farid Alias said Maybank will continue its strategy of focusing on robust risk management, strengthening its capital, and growing its current and savings accounts deposit base to provide sufficient buffers for unexpected events. Maybank rose 1.4% to close at 8.45 ringgit today for a market capitalization of 98.8 billion ringgit. Tenaga Nasional, or TNB, saw its second quarter FY21 net profit jump 25.8% to 821.5 million ringgit due to higher operating profit. Revenue grew 14.2% to 12.44 billion ringgit, mainly thanks to higher sales of electricity arising from higher consumption from commercial and industrial customers, as certain businesses were allowed to operate during the period instead of having to stop under the full economic closure in the last corresponding quarter. It approved an interim dividend of 22 cents per share. For the first half of FY21, net profit jumped 29.8% to 1.78 billion ringgit, while its revenue rose 6.1% to 23.92 billion ringgit. In a statement, TNB President and CEO Datuk Baharudin revealed the group's sustainability pathway with an aim of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The goal will be supported by a commitment to reduce 35% of its emissions intensity as well as 50% of its coal generation capacity by 2035, while its revenue from coal generation plants contribute no more than 25% of its total revenue. Leading up to the 2035 commitment, he said the utility giant will continue to improve efficiency at its existing thermal plants and build up scale in its renewable generation portfolio with the aim of achieving 8,300 megawatts of renewable energy by 2025. TNB closed 0.2% higher at 10 ringgit 30 cent today, valuing the group at 57.09 billion ringgit. Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob will announce the new cabinet lineup at 11 a.m. tomorrow. The Prime Minister's office said in a statement today that the new ministers and deputy ministers will be sworn in next Monday afternoon. The statement follows the Bera MP's audience earlier today with Yang di-Pertuan Agong Al-Sultan Abdullah Riayatuddin Al-Mustafa Billah Shah at Istana Abdul Aziz in Kuantan, Pahang. During the audience, the Prime Minister presented his list of proposed cabinet ministers. According to the palace, the King consented to the list. It was the second audience granted to Ismail Sabri as the country's 9th Prime Minister. The first one took place after the presentation of his appointment letter and swearing-in ceremony. Sime Darby Property swung to a net profit in the second quarter of FY21 as quarterly revenue rose on the back of a major jump in sales of homes due to intensive online marketing. Earnings stood at 19.91 million ringgit versus a net loss of 93 million ringgit a year earlier, while top line surged by 74% to 502.83 million ringgit. It declared a dividend of 1 cent per share. For the first half of FY21, Sime Darby Property said cumulative net profit stood at 80.51 million ringgit against a net loss of 90.28 million ringgit previously, while revenue rose 43% to 1.09 billion ringgit. Looking ahead, Sime Darby said that while the challenging macroeconomic environment is expected to impact the property market for the rest of the year, the real estate developer remains on track to meet its 2.4 billion ringgit new property sales target for FY21. The optimism stems from its strong year-to-date new property sales of about 1.3 billion ringgit and planned real estate launches with gross development value of around 2.1 billion ringgit for the second half of FY21. Unbilled sales stood at about 1.8 billion ringgit as at end June, while its net gearing ratio stands at 0.3 times. At the close, its shares settled 8% lower at 63 sen for a market value of about 4.28 billion ringgit. Highway operator MEX II will defer its 1.3 billion ringgit sukuk principal and profit payments to December 31st, 2021, after getting approval from bondholders. The bond's facility agent, CIMB Investment Bank, said in a filing with Bank Negara Malaysia's FAST website that the principal payment under Tranche 1 of the Islamic medium-term notes was due tomorrow, while the profit payments were due tomorrow and this October 29th. It said the extraordinary resolutions for the deferment were passed by the sukuk holders by way of a circular resolution. MEX II was established by Maju Holdings to undertake the proposed estimated 18-kilometre Putrajaya KLIA highway, which is intended to be a 3-lane dual carriageway that will start at MEX's Putrajaya interchange and merge onto the existing KLIA highway. Earlier this month, Malaysian Rating Corp or MARC said MEX II's bonds are at risk of being downgraded to D, citing the risk of an imminent default. MARC said MEX II's liquidity remains severely strained and that the financial market conditions remain challenging for it to be able to raise capital in time to repay the upcoming sukuk maturities. This program was brought to you by Mercedes-Benz.